Did you know that this week marked the 4-year anniversary of Beyonce's Renaissance? Yep. Can you believe it's been 4 years? The album was released on July 29th, 2022. And even still, whenever my friends and I are talking about the album and its impact, it always leads us back to how the album felt like a cultural reset. And I've kind of been sitting with that for a minute. I would kind of agree with that sentiment, but I actually don't think that Renaissance was the cultural reset, right? I think it revealed that we were ready for one. And let me explain. Before I do though, hey, it's Dr. Lakeisha Watson, epidemiologist and data storyteller, translating data into public health insights for Black women. Welcome back to Epi Fridays and episode 2 of Hot Girl Epi Summer. As an epidemiologist, you know I am studying disparities and health outcomes, and in that we are typically asking questions like, what conditions made this possible, right? And so when kind of thinking about Renaissance, instead of asking why Renaissance became one of the defining albums of the decade, I think the more interesting question is, why did millions of people need it when they did? All right, so let's take it back to the summer of 2022. And I would say on paper, things were getting back to normal, right? Or at least getting back to our new normal. That's what we were calling it at the time, right? So businesses had reopened. People were starting to get out more, kind of resume or at least try to resume their social lives. They were traveling again. But I think emotionally, many people were still carrying the weight of the previous 2 years, right? Research was still showing high levels of loneliness and burnout and anxiety, grief. And we had spent years disconnected from each other. And even when the world opened back up, a lot of us were still operating in, I would say in survival mode, right? We were recovering from isolation, from a period of true uncertainty. And then, here comes Beyonce, gave us Renaissance. And in that album, she told us to dance and take up space and feel good and to move and to be together. And I think that's why people needed it, right? In Break My Soul, she says, release your job, release the stress. I don't necessarily think she was telling people to quit their jobs. Now, some of us did. Okay. But what I do think is she was giving voice to something people were already feeling, right? So she was questioning the idea that our worth has to come from constant productivity, right? I think we are so used to treating joy like something we have to earn, right? So do all the work first, take care of everybody else first, and then we can rest, and then we can experience joy. And Renaissance kind of challenged that. And that's actually consistent with what we know from research. So things like play and leisure and shared joyful experiences, these things have been associated with lower stress and better mental well-being. So look at there, got a little epidemiology and Renaissance. And then there's Alien Superstar, which is one of my favorite songs on the album. And what I love about that song is that Beyonce never asks for permission to take up space or be extraordinary. Baby, she just is. Okay, she already knows it. She's declaring it. And that is a pretty radical message, right? Like, that's powerful, especially in a world that often teaches Black women to shrink ourselves and be humble and make other people comfortable. And so Alien Superstar kind of flips that on the script, right? It says your value isn't something other people get to decide. And I think there's something really healthy about that. The other thing that stood out to me wasn't just the music, it was what happened around it, right? So the Renaissance tour came around and people were planning out, actually, I wouldn't even say planning, I would say curating. People were curating outfits and moments and learning choreography and making friends. People who had never met were suddenly part of the same community. And one thing we know from public health is that connection protects health, okay? People with strong social relationships tend to have better mental health, better physical health, and live longer. So when we're thinking about the Renaissance tour, it wasn't just a concert, it was people reconnecting after years of not being able to reconnect with their family and friends. And I cannot talk about the album without highlighting that Renaissance was rooted in house music and ballroom culture. Now, this is important because those spaces have long been places where Black and Latino LGBTQ plus communities created belonging, chosen family, and joy in a world that often denied them all three. And so Renaissance reminds people of that and honors that history. And maybe all of these things are why the album felt so different, right? It reminded us what healing could look like. It could look like singing and dancing with your friends, feeling at home in your own body, taking up space without apologizing. That's why I think Renaissance felt like a cultural reset for a lot of people. It was because after years of surviving, people were finally ready to feel alive again. And sometimes that's where better health begins. All right, y'all. I'm Dr. Lakeisha Watson. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next week for episode 3 of the Hot Girl Epi Summer Mini Series. Bye.